Hello and welcome to another episode of Simple Time Studios, where I play out and recount adventures in solo roleplay for your entertainment. Today, we will be going through one of the first solo campaigns I ever ran through, and one using a 5th edition system that has become quite near and dear to my heart ever since I first picked it up. I first heard of Everyday Heroes by Evil Genius Games on a podcast I still watch off and on. While originally skeptical, as it wouldn't be the first time someone exploited my sense of nostalgia, I eventually caved and backed one of the basic pledges because I had heard that Egg CEO Dave Scott had brought several of the original designers from D20 Modern on board, and their work was my introduction to the hobby back in the early 2000s. And this has been one of the few times where I've been left with almost no regrets backing a Kickstarter. Everyday Heroes takes the rules of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and heavily adapts them to modern cinematic action. Originally launched in 2022, Everyday Heroes has still managed to have a very productive and interesting history. Despite some drama that is beyond the scope of this episode and even this channel, Evil Genius has since published the core rulebook, the first volume of a supplementary series known as The Vault, and a series of licensed source books for a variety of movie properties ranging from Rambo and Pacific Rim all the way to obscure titles like Universal Soldier, a straight-to-video movie franchise about undead cyborg super soldiers that bankrupted 3 separate studios. Not my first choice for a licensed property, but I can't say Egg didn't manage to get a useful supplement out of it. At the time of writing the initial script for this episode in the middle of July 2025, crowdfunding campaigns for an extended Pacific Rim/Kong Island supplement and a general weapons book are completed and should be out sometime later this year, barring unexpected circumstances. Plans for standalone spin-offs for urban fantasy and a Star Wars-style space opera are underway, although the details have become a bit muddled at the time of writing this episode. We'll include an update on that if I get one after this episode. Anyway, our campaign will take us through a homebrewed contemporary campaign setting that has no connection with the Redemption universe created by Evil Genius Games. Instead, we are going through a setting tentatively called the Axman Chronicles after the main character's background as a woodsman and wilderness tracker. Axman Chronicles has been voluntarily rated 16+ for depictions of violence, horror, and other mature themes. Originally inspired by an unhealthy amount of indie horror games, see the playlist of fellow YouTuber Manly Badass Hero, all one word, for what that inspiration looks like, and of police procedural dramas like Criminal Minds and NCIS. Other influences, such as obscure video games I've played in the 90s and early 2000s, have since worked their way in as the campaign progressed. It is a world that takes players far away from the relative safety of the cities and sheltered suburban communities, to the little backwoods town of Clearbrook, Pennsylvania. A fictional town in north-central Pennsylvania, it is a little slice of Appalachia best described as halfway to nowhere. It's a town that's modeled off of real towns in the area that I have visited, and admittedly more than a little hallmark thrown in for spice. A quiet, sleepy little town that just wants some peace and quiet in an insane world. And it's a town full of people that will have to ultimately deal with threats both mundane and extraordinary if they want to keep that peace. Fortunately, they will have the help of a few everyday heroes. Our first story in this setting follows the exploits of Jacob Flint, a wise hunter, more on that in a minute, from the fall of 2023 to March/April of 2025 after the United States elects a fictional 47th president, something that will make sense by the end of the campaign. He's basically your typical brooding anti-hero from the early 2000s, has a troubled past, moved to Clearbrook to escape said past and to heal, built up a reputation with the local sheriff's department as an expert tracker and master of finding people lost in the woods, and generally has a quiet life. His story begins with his past finally catching up with him. Jacob's story is also one of my oldest solo games and the very first I ever played anything using the 5th edition rule set. So for the first couple episodes I will fall back on my old 3.5 Pathfinder 1st edition instincts until I learned what advantage and disadvantage actually means, and otherwise got a better feel for everyday heroes. So yes, there will be plenty of hilarious gaffes where I misread a rule or forget that my character has certain abilities. Alright, now let me show you how character creation works in Everyday Heroes by retracing my steps creating Jacob Flint. For step 1, coming up with a character concept, I sort of had this character in the back of my head for a writing project that never really took off. Until now, I guess. I originally wasn't even going to use him for this campaign either. I generally go with smart or tech characters in modern and science fiction games. But after flipping through the character art, I found myself pulled to the character art for the Hunter class and mentally went back to the idea for Jacob Flint. For step 2, picking his background, I went with Survivor as it fit him the best. Jacob was kidnapped as a kid by a dark cult known only as the Lodge, and the experience has left him scarred, especially as he survived and others didn't. Needless to say, this makes him less than charming at parties, but we'll get to that in a moment. I mark down the mechanical benefits for that background and move on. For step 3, I pick his profession. I picture him running a small homestead farm, growing and selling vegetables for his money. The hard labor and relative isolation would give him peace away from people and focus his energies on something other than his past. Agriculture is the closest profession to what I have in mind. I mark down the benefits for that profession and move on. For step 4, we finally get to his ability scores. I use the standard set option of 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. I put the highest stat in Wisdom as that's his archetype score, and the second highest stat in Constitution as I pictured Jacob being a particularly hardy survivor. Dexterity got the 13, and Strength got 12. Intelligence got 10, since I don't picture Jacob being particularly smart or dumb. And the 8 went to Charisma, since he isn't very social due to a number of obvious reasons. Afterwards, I add all the modifiers from his background and profession. Wisdom got bumped to 16, and Constitution got a double bump to 16 as well. Strength got brought up to 13. Overall, he's a very observant and tough individual, with an only slightly above average ability to defend himself and an abrasive nature that makes him hard to get along with for some people. Sounds about right for the backstory I gave him. For step 5, I write down all of his class abilities, hit point totals, defense, and everything else he gets from the Wise Hero archetype and the Hunter class. And that's pretty much it. I have a rough handle on his personality, and for now I'm going to stick with the equipment he's got from his background and profession, plus the recommended selections from his archetype and class. Lastly, using the recommendations in the Solo Game Master's Guide, I start him off at level 2 instead of level 1. This nets me a couple additional talents, but more importantly, it gives me more HP and the ability to pick a feat, as the game allows you to pick a feat every even level. Looking through the list of the core rulebook, the major feat Gorilla sounds particularly fitting. I can hide him more easily in poor visibility, and if I'm concealed and fire Flint's weapon, it doesn't automatically give away my position. Certainly something a hunter would know how to do. And that's it. Jacob Flint is ready to start adventuring.